All right on the hour. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I don't think I've ever attended a webinar where there were nearly 100 folks in the waiting room before even opening the webinar. So I think this is absolutely a testament to the interest in and importance of the topic. We really appreciate you being here, and it's great to see all of the introductions already happening in the chat. My name is Sonia Anderson. I work with INEE, and I'm very happy to be here today alongside colleagues from INEE and ECW. In case you are confused as to what webinar you have joined, this webinar will focus on localization pathways, navigating ECW's funding requirements, specifically geared towards national actors. I'm just going to share a couple housekeeping notes and then pass it along. So you are muted. This is a very large and already very well attended webinar. So you won't be able to speak, but as you are all doing, it's fantastic to see you interacting in the chat. Please do introduce yourself in the chat. If you have questions, we encourage you to note them in the Q&A function. If that's challenging or you prefer to use the chat, that's perfectly fine as well. Our panelists will be referring to these questions throughout, and then we will have ample time at the end of presentations for questions to be answered. We will also share the PowerPoint and recording of the webinar along with any resources that are referred to after this webinar on the INEE website. So if for any reason you have to jump off, or if you have colleagues who were not able to join, all of this material will be available via INEE after this event. So with that, I'll hand over to Dr. Faiza Hassan, who is INEE's director. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I'm really happy to be with you here all today, together with colleagues from Education Cannot Wait. It's an important, and I'm really also happy to see this many people have joined this webinar. It's an important session. I won't say much. I will only say that localization is not just a principle that we talk about. I think it's very central to how we reimagine doing work in education in emergency settings, where we are very committed to make sure that resources and decision-making is closer to those who lead responses on the ground. And so today's session is really about how national actors can access ECW funding. And we have some really amazing colleagues with us here today. And so I hope that this session will bring some practical insights and a shared commitment to advance localization together. With that, I hand over to Dianah Nelsen, who's the Chief of Education for Education Cannot Wait. Dianah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Faiza and Sonia, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Oh my gosh, it's amazing to see how well you've responded to us. It's really a pleasure to welcome all of our national actors, partners to this critical discussion on ECW's funding pathways for national organizations, especially today with all the funding cuts we have experienced in this sector, especially this year. At Education Cannot Wait, we view localization not just as a principle, but as a core mechanism for delivering quality education, particularly in emergencies in the context where you all work. You, as our national partners, are really the frontline responders, the guardians of continuity, and the holders of all the local expertise. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but I really just want to acknowledge that. Your leadership is fundamental to making our collective efforts effective and equitable and sustainable. Without you, we can't do what we do, and we wouldn't even be able to do it that well. Today, we want to shift the focus from why localization. I feel like there have been so many conversations around why localization, why and all of that, to a more of how you can access ECW funding. We aim to ensure that ECW's funding requirements and mechanisms truly support your ability to lead and manage and implement programs on the ground. We know that it's not always easy, and we will be going through some of those requirements and hearing from you also how to navigate those. We really look forward to having an honest and collaborative conversation on how we make our processes work better for you, accelerating our joint mission to reach the most marginalized children in education and provide them the education that they deserve. So thank you so much for your partnership and for leading this vital work and being here with us. And without further ado, I just want to maybe ask Esther or someone from the INEE team to go to the next slide, please. And then I'll hand over. So this is the agenda today. I'll be handing over to different colleagues from the Secretariat that are here today. But for today, we will take you through what ECW's commitments and approaches to localization are, just as a recap to remind some of you that may not be familiar with what we've committed to do in our current strategic plan. We will then take you through the overall requirements to access our funding. Within those, we'll talk about the grantee eligibility requirements, and then we'll talk about the grantee selection requirements, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A, where you will also have an opportunity to ask us dedicated questions and all the hard questions that you may have for us. We are very happy and willing to receive them today. Next slide. So ECW, our current strategic plan, we are in year 3 of our strategic plan. We made very, very bold commitments that are anchored into, nothing for us without us. We've committed to making sure that we advance localization in EPC where we work. What does that mean for us? Meaningful participation of local organizations, women-led organizations, organizations of persons with disabilities, all different categories, refugee-led organizations, so that they have influence and that they are at the core of the leadership of responses in the context that we work. This means that we are working and being intentional about what strategic partnerships we have and the models of partnerships that we apply. And that more than that, we also ensure that national partners are supported through capacity building approaches and to ensure that the systemic changes in how things happen year on and year out in the different contexts that where we work. Our programs, we want to make sure that our programs are also managed more and more by a diverse group of actors, including local and national actors. These commitments, you can find them in our strategic plan, current strategic plan, but we are hoping that, we are a young organization, a young fund, we are learning with you, and we are hoping that we can even do more moving forward. Next slide. So, we all know about the grant bargain. There's so many different, angles and parameters to localization. As a young, small fund, we can't do all of it. We've honed in on 4 pillars. Those are the ones I just spoke about. One is on meaningful participation. So what does that mean? Ensuring that national organizations are part and parcel of the design processes of our programs. Some of you have participated in the MAP Development Committee, where, it's a convening space to design our programs. In terms of coordination, clusters or EI working group, ensuring that national partners are part of that. Even in the selection of the grantees, we always require that there's a national organization or representative of a national organization on the selection committee. Then when it comes to strategic and equitable partnerships, we know that as of 2024, all the programs, particularly our multi-year resilience programs, are now being implemented through the consortia approach. And part of that requirement, I'll be going through quickly through that. But within that, we also have a requirement that national actors are part of that. Capacity strengthening is something that has now been embedded into our consortia approach. And we've also identified dedicated budget for capacity support and also for national partners on the consortium. One of our intentions as a fund, of course, is intentional funding to national actors directly as much as possible, where it's possible, particularly, which is what we're going to talk about today. And our commitment is that at least 25% of our program budget goes to dedicated national actors on the consortium. In some contexts, this has gone above 25%, and we very much welcome that. We try to track where the money goes through our delivery chain mapping. That is a tool that is filled in by the grantees to see who else is receiving our funds after we give that money to our grantees. Then learning approach. Again, as a young organization and fund, we try to learn and improve our processes in real time. We take a step back to learn with you and you with us so that we can improve. This year, we're going to do what we are calling a consortia review to see how that is working and if some of these things we've put in place are actually taking hold or if we need to fine-tune them. Next slide, please. All right, so We have two sets of criteria to select a grantee. So an organization, an entity that receives funding from us. We have what we call the eligibility criteria. This just means that you can actually receive money from ECW. And ECW, yes, but UNICEF as our host, my colleague Micheal and his team will talk about what those eligibility requirements are. In my team, we call them the legal requirements, because without them, we can't legally send money to you. Then on the program side, which I lead, is the grantee selection requirements. And these are more at country-led. It's a country-led process. It's a standard selection criteria or requirements that we've provided to all contexts. And it's supported by the grantee selection committee, and it's managed by the coordination body. So clusters or EIE working group in a given context. Next slide. I'm sorry that I'm going so fast, but we want to create enough space for Q&A, and we'll be also sharing these slides later on. So, don't be anxious about too much information. You'll be able to access the information and process it in real time. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've gone through this, but maybe one thing I want to say here is that all of this is in our MAP manual that was published last year. When I say country-led process, the requirements are set by ECW, and then as stipulated in our MAP Multi-Year Resilience Program manual. But the process, the application of that criteria is done at country level through a grantee selection committee, as I mentioned, and it's usually managed and supported by the coordination mechanism. So cluster, refugee working group, or EIE working group in that context. This rubric, the selection, the requirements cannot be changed or amended. They are set by ECW. They cannot be contextualized. Partners can add on things, but they cannot take off anything. They add up to 100 points. And depending on where you fare within that process, it determines who gets the funds or who is selected to be the lead. Can we go to the next slide? I recognize that this in here, you can't see very much. I'm going to be brief here because this is a very detailed rubric. You can find this in our MAP manual on pages 47 to 76. But essentially, this is a rubric. The section A of the rubric gives you the legal requirements to receive money. These are not scored. They're just a yes or no. So whether you have co-assessments, my colleagues are going to talk about this. So I'm not going to get into details of that. But the legal requirements that I mentioned about, the eligibility requirements, those are just yes or no. They are not scored at all. Then in the next section of the rubric, that actually talks about the ability of the organization to deliver the program. Part of that is, for example, proven experience of managing grants of similar size. So if our first emergency response is 5 million, have you managed, as the organization managed a grant of a similar size, you get 10 points for that, and that is assessed by the organization, the grantee selection committee, and we give parameters of how. So if you've managed a smaller grant, you get 50%, for example, instead of 10%, 10 points instead of getting 5 points instead of getting 10 points. Then another criteria within that, for example, is technical and human resource capacity and experience regarding gender responsive and disability inclusive program interventions, whether directly or as a specialized organization. So again, this gives you 10 points if your organization has experience doing this. Things like existing geographical presence in the crisis affected zones of where the program is targeted also gives you about 5 points. Ability and proven experience of delivering rapidly and at scale during an emergency. I'm going to stop here because I don't want to go in all of them. There are quite many. The point I want to make is that these are the ones, these requirements on this page, when you go to read our MAP manual, inform ECW or the partners on ground the ability of the organization to actually design and deliver quality program for children. That is what this rubric assesses. So those are like the selection requirements from a programming perspective. Can we go to next slide? Briefly, I'm going to take you through what is new within our consortium model as it links to localization. ECW, as I mentioned, has started as of 2024 to deliver all our multi-year programs through the consortium model. It is to ensure that we are more efficient financially, is to ensure that we have stronger localization. We have a requirement that every consortia needs to have at least, so which means it's a minimum, a national organization as a partner on the consortium. It's also about making sure you have a health mix of international and national organizations. There are contexts where we actually have the entire consortia that is, or 50% of the consortia national organizations. It's also for us to really diversify partnerships, which is a commitment we made on terms of localization that I mentioned above. Next slide. Within those commitments, within the consortia, when you're selected and you've met all the other requirements, the consortia lead or the grantee that will be receiving money from ECW is supposed to ensure that, again, there's a national or local organization to ensure that not less than 25% of the envelope for MAPS funding, and now also the funds, goes to the national partners. We have to make sure that there are also national organizations on the consortia are provided with 7% overhead costs to all partners on the consortia, because we do also understand that you have operational costs that you incur during the implementation, and that shouldn't stop at just the grantee. It should go to your level too as consortia partners. And more importantly, that there is commitment for institutional capacity development for the national organization and the consortium. So this is not about providing technical expertise to the national organization. We know that you already have the technical expertise, but this is more institutional capacity support. For example, your HR systems or your financial systems support, or, safeguarding, PSA, all of those things that usually you may not have them built into your system. We make sure that within this consortia, you have a group of international organizations that can support and provide dedicated capacity development institutionally for the consortia partner, the national partner on the consortium. I think the next one is my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, more. Okay, I think a lot of these are repeated over there, but it's really about accountability. So if you are a grantee, you have overall oversight of the program. You are also responsible for reporting, joint program reporting, not just the individual reporting by each of the consortium members, making sure that, again, the local partners on the consortia are capacitated from an institutional perspective, that you also ensure that there's a GLOW function. This is the gender lead organization function, to ensure that they can perform that role to support, and that there's earmarked funding available within the consortia to support on gender, related interventions. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Micheal Corlin, and he will introduce himself and his team. Thank you so much. Over to Micheal.
Thank you so much, Dianah. I'm Micheal Corlin, I'm Chief of Finance and Operations in ECW. And I just wanted to say we've been really ambitious on localization for as long as I can remember in ECW. We've had some good progress, but we believe we can do even more in terms of delivering on localization. We're also, and this was mentioned by Dianah, we're hosted by UNICEF. And that, for those of you who have tried to be grantees for ECW, you will see that the grant agreement that comes to you is also signed by UNICEF as it comes through, and not by ECW. So legally, we are part of that. And that also means that we are subject to certain requirements under the UNICEF framework that is outside of our control. We need to live up to it. It's important to say that details are really important, because a lot of what we need to do in order to make sure that grantees are eligible to receive funding is that we need to be able to objectively verify those details. So it needs to be in a certain way. We need to get the details right before we can submit it for payments through the UNICEF system. So what we want to do today, and I'll hand over to my colleagues in a minute, is just to take you through some of those details so they're well understood, what it is that we require, the how of Dianah's presentation, and then hopefully through sharing this information and explaining it, we'll be able to progress even further on the localization agenda. With this, I want to hand over to my colleague, Yoshiyuki, who will take us through the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Micheal, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yoshiyuki, and I work under Micheal's team at the ECW Secretariat with my colleague, Rogers, who is making intervention after me in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to talk about the overall sort of framework or the requirements for a grantee to receive funds from ECW, but through UNICEF. Now, I think we need to be a little bit clear about here about the eligibility and the selection. And I think as Diana mentioned, these eligibility requirements could be part of the selection criteria, but there have been some cases where some grantees were selected, or some organizations were selected as grantees, and then ECW actually facilitated to become eligible to receive funds. But it really depends on the selection committee and the ECW secretariat at the time when the grant is offered to the organizations, whether to really emphasize this eligibility or not. Now, if the organization does not have these eligibilities or eligibility criteria, then we have to either facilitate to strengthen the eligibility, or else we need to reject the grantee and not, and then we have to select another organization to be the grantee. Now, these the three areas that we need to look at to be eligible to receive funds from UNICEF. UNICEF is again, the custodian of the ECW funds. Therefore, when you become a grantee to the ECW, you will actually have a contract with UNICEF. Therefore, we need to comply with the UNICEF's rules and regulations for the grantee to receive the funds, the ECW funds. Now, number one is that this grantee needs to pass so-called the UN core value assessment. That's when an organization has to go through it when organization actually registers with the UN Partner for the Restoration, the UNPP. And I just share with you the link for the UNPP as well. The second is that once your organization is registered with the UNPP, then your organization has to go through so-called the micro-assessment. And then you have to be given the low risk rating in the micro-assessment. And then thirdly, after that, or maybe at the same time, you also have to go through PSEA assessment, which my colleague Rachel is going to explain after me and Rogers. So again, I think those three are the eligibility requirements to receive ECW funds. And especially because the microassessment and then also the PSEA, it takes quite a long time. For example, microassessment takes at least 3 months. Therefore, when the grant actually involves any immediate intervention on the ground, then probably the selection criteria be given more emphasis to the microassessment. But whereas there's a kind of a little bit of leniency in terms of the time until the implementation, then probably the microassessment could be a less emphasized criteria amongst the other criteria. So I'll just now give the floor to my colleague Rogers to go through a little more details about the UNPP restoration and also microassessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoshi. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. If we could go to the next slide. My name is Rogers. I work within the ECW Secretariat in grants management. I'm going to take you through the UNPP registration. So it's a very simple process to register for an organization that does not have a profile. And if you go to your Google search and just type, UNPP registration, you will find a guide that outlines the entire steps, and it's in various languages, including English, Arabic, French, Spanish, and I believe Russian. And so the process, once you get to that link, is you create an account like you would in any other, sign up space. You create an account and then you register the account with, your details, and then you would receive an email to verify your account. And in registering, some of the things that you would need to include, like, the type of the organization that you're registering. There is a number of them, including an academic organization, a CBO, which is a community-based organization, INGO, and national NGO, as well as the Red Crescent, Red Cross movement. And then after that, you would enter some other basic information about your organization, the legal status, where it is located, and other information you would ask in a checklist. And at the end of it, you have to verify that all the information that you have provided is accurate. Now, once you have you have registered your account and you have received verification to your account, you can then log in, and within your profile, you can access the UN core value assessment tool, which is a self-assessment tool, which you would then self-assess on the UN core values, which include the integrity, professionalism, and respect for diversity. And this assessment is, as Yoshi has mentioned, is one of the assessments that you would require. So they kind of go hand in hand with the UNPP registration, because once you register, then you can do the assessment. And the assessment is valid for 5 years from the date of verification. So you would provide your self-assessment. There is a checklist with specific questions which you have to answer, and provide documentation. And so once you provide the documentation, there is a team within UNICEF called CSO Partnerships, which would then review your self-assessment and verify that whatever you have, provided in the questionnaire vis-a-vis your documentation are accurate. And then that UN core assessment is verified, and from the date of verification, it is valid for 5 years. If we could go to the next slide. The next sort of assessment that we do is what we call micro-assessment. And as Yoshi has mentioned, if at the point of selection you do not have a micro-assessment in place, ECW will engage a third-party provider. Currently, we are in partnerships with BDO to conduct a micro-assessment, and we will take care of the cost of micro-assessment. And it focuses on compliance with policies, procedures, regulations, and it also follows the scope of the UN micro-assessment prescribed by UN agencies. And it has a number of areas that it focuses on, including the legal status of the entity at the time, the governance structure, financial viability, whether it is sound, it has sound financial management practices and procedures in place, in terms of the capacity to manage a program, whether it has implemented similar programs, if it has policies and procedures around accounting in place, fixed assets, and of course, reporting and procurement processes where necessary. Now, this assessment, similar to the core assessment, has a validity of 5 years if you have a low risk rating. It also can be medium risk rating or high risk rating. We don't engage or contract organizations with a high risk rating. If it's moderate or medium, in some instances, you could be contracted, but there would be safeguards put in place to closely monitor the organization so that we are satisfied with the program implementation and the processes in place, and also as a way to, improve the capacity of the organization. But mostly we tend to contract organizations with low risk rating. And as I mentioned, the validity for the micro assessment is normally 5 years. And I believe the next slide would be for Rachel. If we could go to the next slide. Yes, that would be it from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Rogers. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Rachel Basley, ECW Senior Safeguarding Consultant, and I work in ECW's Strategy, Planning and Accountability team, and I lead on PSEA assessments for ECW. What is a UN Common PSEA assessment? Well, it's much more than a compliance requirement or a compliance mechanism. It's actually a capacity strengthening tool, and it's really helpful to think of it in that way because it's really an opportunity to strengthen your own organization's policies and practices to safeguard children and adults from harm. And in doing so, you can also work to protect your own organisation from harm and from reputational risk by having strong governance policies and practices in place. It's an assessment tool that's used by multiple UN agencies, so UNICEF, and that's why ECW is using it, because as we know, UNICEF is our host, UNHCR, WFP, WHO, IOM, and UNFPA. And that's incredibly helpful because once you have a valid PSEA assessment that's logged in the UN partner portal, then that can be relied on by those other UN participating agencies. And that really helps you to compete for funding with other UN agencies. It's, as I mentioned, it's logged in the UN partner portal. There's a dedicated PSEA assessment module. Like the hacked microassessment, it's valid for 5 years. However, if there's an issue around a sexual exploitation and abuse case and appropriate corrective action is not taken, that could trigger a review of the entire PSEA assessment. And that can actually lead to a suspension of the PSEA assessment. But generally, these PSEA assessments are valid for 5 years. There are 8 core standards that have to be met. And there is an opportunity for some organisations to be exempt from a PSEA assessment, but only if they have no direct contact with beneficiaries. And from our experience, that's very rare. Even research institutes, tend to be required to carry out PSEA assessments. So it's only if they can really demonstrate they will have no direct contact with beneficiaries. It's a little bit different to the hacked micro assessment in that it doesn't focus on a risk assessment scale, it focuses on a capacity assessment scale. So to attain a full capacity rating, that means you have to meet 8 core standards. So far, we can say that none of our grantees to date have met all 8 standards with their initial submission of their assessment. So, and I can talk you through why that's happened and some good tips for addressing standards and preparing in advance. Most of our grantees come in with 6 to 7 standards having been met, and that means you have a medium capacity rating. And what we can do then is work with our partners to agree and adopt a capacity strengthening implementation plan. We can move ahead with a grant confirmation letter once 6 standards have been met, and then we have 6 months to work with our partner to ensure that the remaining 2 standards are met. If 5 or less standards are met, then we're usually not able to proceed with a grant confirmation letter. So we need to work with our partners to make sure they get to a minimum of 6 standards. Only in very exceptional cases will we be able to proceed with a low capacity rating, and usually if there was absolutely no contact with beneficiaries at the country level. It's also important to note that in the financial management system called Vision, which is used by UNICEF, there's actually what's known as a hard gate in the system. It would not be possible for us to register a partner with a low capacity rating under their PSEA assessment and then proceed with making a disbursement or entering into a new grant agreement. So that's built into the financial management system. Next slide, please. So this is what the process looks like. If an organisation is selected as a grantee, we would be in contact with the organisation and determine if a valid UN Common PSEA assessment was in place. If not, we would initiate tasking and we would send some detailed instructions to the partner organisation. And that would involve the partner organisation then conducting their own self-assessment and recording that in the UN partner portal in the PSEA assessment module. We'd ask you to then notify us, and we would then review your organisation's self-assessment. We have to review all of the supporting documents that you share with us. We verify them, and then we undertake our own assessment. And then we determine a capacity rating. So it's going to be one of those three ratings: full capacity, medium capacity, or low capacity. If the capacity rating is less than full capacity, then we would work with the organisation to strengthen capacity and develop a capacity strengthening implementation plan. And we need to finalise the assessment within 6 months, otherwise we can't move ahead with a grant confirmation letter or make any disbursements. We can initiate a grant confirmation letter once 6 standards have been met, but we have to ensure that the remaining 2 standards are met within 6 months. Otherwise, there will be a block in the financial management system and we would not be able to disperse funds. So that's very important to remember. Next slide, please. And sorry, just before I move on, it's difficult to predict the time that's needed to undertake a PSEA assessment in full. However, what we find is when partners have all of their documents in order, and there's a whole suite of supporting documents have to be submitted. If everything's in order, we can move ahead with an assessment fairly quickly, within a matter of weeks. Where we're seeing a lot of delays is where certain standards haven't been met, and we'll talk about that now. There are 8 core standards. They range from organisational policy right through to human resources systems, reporting mechanisms for incidents, services referrals, and capacity to provide a survivor-centred approach to assistance and referrals, and also investigations. Next slide, please. So there are some core standards where we're noticing that partners are consistently coming to us and there are gaps and they're not able to demonstrate that they're meeting those standards. And there are some good tips that we can share with you to help you prepare for a PSEA assessment ahead of time. Because if you're more prepared, once it comes to the time to undertake a full formal PSEA assessment, things can move quickly if you have certain supporting documents in place. The first one would be to look at core standard 1. What are the requirements for ensuring that the policy that you might have in place meets the requirements of the UN Common PSEA assessment scheme. And a really easy place to start is to read the UN Secretary General's 2003 bulletin about SEA and ensure that with whatever your policy document looks like, that it aligns with the definitions around SEA in the bulletin. That's really important, because if you fall short on that, then that really can throw everything out. We have to make sure that policies are really aligning with the requirements of the bulletin. In terms of human resources, core standard 3, there's standard candidate disclosure language that can be used, and we're going to share a link to a really helpful resource in a moment on that. There's a very specific requirement under core standard 3, and that's really requiring candidates, so people who are applying for jobs with an organisation, we're requiring them to indicate if they've ever been dismissed from their role or if they've left an organisation before an investigation on SEA had been completed. And that's really important because not everybody who might engage in sexual exploitation and abuse is criminally charged and prosecuted. So you could see people moving around the sector who are perpetrating sexual exploitation and abuse, but they don't have a criminal record, there's no criminal conviction, and organisations are missing the opportunity to ensure that they're engaging in safe recruitment. So the purpose of Core Standard 3 is to really help organisations strengthen their recruitment practices and make sure they're requiring candidates to really disclose ahead of time if there have been any issues with previous employment around SEA. Core Standard 4, mandatory training. There's a lot that can be done before you reach the point of undertaking a PSEA assessment. You need to develop a training plan, and there's certain content that needs to be included in your training modules, and there's lots of existing training resources that are publicly available. So you don't need to start from the very beginning when you develop your own training program. Core Standard 6, assistance and referrals. So this is really aimed at ensuring that survivors are supported if there's been an SEA incident. You need to be very clear on what sort of services in the local context you could rely on if your organisation experienced a situation where someone encountered sexual exploitation and abuse. You need to really know what would your organisation do? Which service could you refer that survivor to? How would you go about doing that in a survivor-centred way, in a confidential way? And having a referral form can really help with that as well. In your local context, it might be possible to draw on existing resources, such as mapping that's been undertaken by an interagency group, such as a PSEA working group. But you need to really understand in your local context how that really works. And the same with Core Standard 7 on investigations. A really important question to ask within your organisation is, do you have a qualified staff member who can undertake SEA investigations? Not fraud control investigations, not broader misconduct investigations, but SEA investigations. There's lots of training that's available, and we would need to ensure that your organisation, if you're saying you've got internal capacity to undertake an SEA investigation, that the person doing that is qualified. We would usually ask to see a certificate to that effect. And if that's not the case, then you need to have a clear plan in terms of how you would get some external support to conduct an investigation. For example, you might have an agreement in place. You might be able to identify a service in your country that you could turn to. So there are many ways to prepare ahead of time for your PSEA assessment. Next slide, please. We mentioned that there are many resources that are publicly available. The first one, of course, to review is the Multi-Year Resilience Program Manual, which is available on our website. And then in terms of specifically PSEA assessments resources, we're showing you here the UN Secretary General's Bulletin, which is a really important starting point. There's also an excellent UNICEF PSEA toolkit, and there are many practical templates that you can use, lots of great guidance in there. We highly recommend that you refer to that. There's also a new victim-centred approach to investigation of SEA complaints, investigators manual that's been released by the Interagency Standing Committee this year, and that's a really important resource to look to as well. And there's also PSEA assessment resources on the UN Partner Portal website. So we're going to add links to those into the chat now. And you can also always contact us at any time. Next slide, please. And you'll see here we've listed our various email addresses if you've got specific questions about programming, about grants management, and about PSEA assessments. Thank you. I'll hand back to Dianah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel and colleagues. And actually, we're going to open it up for Q&A, but maybe before we do that, just briefly to caveat one thing, as now we've gone through the grantee selection criteria, and we've also gone through the eligibility criteria. Can I ask Esther to go back to the first, I think it's the third slide that has the eligibility juxtaposed next to each other, please, and thank you. So this is critical, particularly depending on what funding window you're applying for. So for ECW, when it comes to the multi-year resilience programs, oftentimes it takes us up to 6 months, in some contexts even a year, God forbid, to develop the program, to go through everything, the process. Oftentimes there, the starting point is the selection criteria, the grantee selection criteria, because we have the luxury of time and everything. When it comes to the first emergence window, the eligibility requirements take precedence in the sense that because we have a timeliness issue, most of you know it's in our name, education cannot wait. Timeliness is critical, and because these are first emergencies, what that means is that when we are shortlisting potential people that organizations can receive our funds for the first emergency response, if you do not meet the criteria, the eligibility criteria, you don't even get into the grantee selection criteria, because as Yoshi mentioned, it takes on average 3 months to get the the HACT assessment. And our threshold is 12 weeks to do the process for the first emergency response. So that is already the entirety of the time that you would need to get the HACT assessment done, which means that if we are doing a first emergency response, we look at the shortlist, we request the cluster or the EIE working group to already pre-select candidates, organizations that meet the eligibility criteria. If you don't meet the eligibility criteria, you wouldn't even go to phase 2 of the selection, the grantee selection requirements. But in the multi-year resilience program, because they take longer time to design and to develop, even if you did not meet the eligibility criteria, you can still be considered, and ECW might support you where necessary to conduct the valid micro assessment. That is one of the steps we are also taking as we are leaning in more into localization and seeing how we can support local partners. So if you met all the other criteria, but you didn't have the HACT and others, we can support you on the micro assessment to conduct it. So I just wanted to caveat that depending on the window, the criteria can take, one criteria can take precedence over the other. Sonia, I think we are back to you, or Francesca for the Q&A.
Hi, colleagues. My name is Francesca Pina. I'm also part of the ECW team. While the presentations were ongoing, with the support of the INEE colleagues, I was trying to filter through all the different and numerous questions that were coming our ways from participants. So I've done my best to kind of select maybe 3 for Dianah, 3 for Micheal's team, as well as maybe 3 for Rachel. So maybe Dianah, if it's okay, maybe I could start with you, if that's okay, just because you're on the top of the list of the questions.
That's absolutely fine. And some of the colleagues from my team are also here. So yes.
Fantastic. And some of them have also been replied. I really do invite participants to check at the bottom of the screen. There is in fact a link that says Q&A, and you can see all the questions that were asked by participants, and some of them have already been answered. But I just felt it was maybe good for some of them to just be recommented on during the plenary. So the first one, we have a question from Mr. Saeed Ahmed. So he was asking that as most of ECW funding is channeled through international partners and with local CSOs playing a subcontractor role, what are the concrete steps that ECW is taking to ensure that national actors can transition from being subcontractors and accessing direct funding? And I know there are some elements that have already been, addressed even during the presentations, but just maybe this is quite a key one that I'm sure is of interest to most participants. And then maybe I can follow up with a second question just so that you can keep both in mind. The
Yes.
second one is, so Aochi Aluta Diodon asks, can a local NGO partner with an international NGO in a consortium, can the local NGO in fact be the lead rather than it being the international NGO? And maybe you can just start addressing these two so that we then don't overflow the conversations with answers and information. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So say this question, I even tried to answer it, but you're right. This probably requires, for us to speak about it. You are absolutely right. So I talked about the delivery chain mapping, which is essentially what the information you're sharing here comes out there to see who is our grantees subcontracting. In the past, we were looking at all different levels and everything. We have since checked that to see if we can also track where money is directly being given to the CSO, the national organization directly. We are taking a few steps to improve this. We are being very intentional from the start. There are contexts where we've gone in and we've said explicitly that this call for proposal is only dedicated for national organizations. And even in my response in the chat, I mentioned Pakistan in this current response for the floods. It's going to be a nationally led consortia. They're still going through the process. In the context where we also know that national organizations that are very well capacitated and meet most of the criteria, we do this. We always check. We've also now started flagging to the cluster and the EIE working group to share with us, we are calling it pre-assessment, but to share with us a list of all national organizations that meet our eligibility criteria. So forget the other ones on, most of you meet all of the other ones on grantee selection criteria, but the eligibility criteria, so the PSA, the HACT, the UN Partners Portal, if we have that list already, then we can be intentional when we come into a context, because oftentimes we are told, oh, but there's no national organizations that can get funds. Another step we are taking is having these conversations. A lot of other things that, or the context where we've been told our partners actually don't know what they need to receive our funds, right? So we are creating these small spaces to share this information openly so that you can ask and then we can, answer questions in real time. Of course, we have shared now our contacts. You can reach out to us if you have different questions. We are hoping to be more ambitious in the next strategic plan, being more intentional. ECW is going through a hosting review, see who is going to be potentially our next host. And there we are very intentional that localization is critical to us. So we're going to be negotiating with our next host to make sure that there's a bit more flexibility on who can receive funds directly from us. So that's on Said's question. And then the question on whether the local organization can lead. Absolutely, yes. Why not? There is nowhere in our policies or anywhere that it says that a national organization cannot lead. In fact, even the better. We will get behind you. We will support you. International organizations can be behind you. They can take a different role. As ECW, we do not have any requirement against this. In fact, we strongly encourage it. And there are a few contexts where the national organizations lead, and I think we have a partner in Pakistan, in Ukraine, Yemen, where the national organizations are leading. So yes, absolutely. Over to you, Francesca.
Thank you so much, Dianah. Then I have two questions, which I felt were quite related and interesting. So I don't know exactly if it's for Micheal's team or maybe your team, Dianah, but I'm just going to put it out there in the universe, and then whoever feels that they're the right person to answer, go ahead. So we have two questions, one from Suzanne Zudema and one from Neo Soy, that talk about the risks of registering in some countries of operation due to the conflict situation that they're facing. So Suzanne asks that due to political instability and funding limitations, they are not registered separately in the countries that they work in. And in fact, they are registered in the US. Can they still be considered as a local organization according to ECW requirements? And I think similar or tied to this question, there was one by Neo Soe. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing. So again, if the legal registration is mandatory in the country of operation, this will potentially exclude all organizations operating in a conflict context where registration exposes the CSO to serious security risks. Can we maybe address these concerns, which are extremely valid, and how these, in fact, may affect these organizations in accessing funds?
I think that question right there just goes to show how complex our contexts are where we work. Yes, these questions cut across the different teams, and I think Michael can speak to the legality, whether you can legally receive money from us if you're not registered, which is a different part of it. But I think Rachel can also speak about the risks of, engaging with an organization that is not legitimately recognized or registered in the context. And we are all, for education and child-based programming and the risks that come with all of that. We do recognize that it could be a very difficult context to register and the risks that poses. But we also have to look at it from ECW's risk and the risk to the affected population. And I would like Rachel maybe to come in on that, and Michael to speak to the whether you can actually receive funds from us if you're not registered. I'm going to lean in on the question on the US registration. And my understanding is that the organization is, in this case, registered in the US, but all their activities are implemented locally by refugees. So for us, that will be an international organization because we have a lot of partners that have activities that are locally implemented, but their registration is in another context. We would, in this case, take a local organization as an organization that has their HQ, home, and all of that, rooted into that context and where they operate. And that is the local organization. If you're registered in the US and you're locally implemented, you are an international organization, as many. But to the other questions, over to Rachel and then maybe Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Dianah. I'll let Michael come in about the registration point, but just, with any proposal and any investment, we always need to ensure that adequate risk assessments are undertaken. So risks are identified, appropriate risk mitigation measures are adopted. And the aim, of course, is always to be accurate, but try and reduce the risk as much as possible. So in this situation, you would need to ensure that there are really adequate, strong risk mitigation measures around safeguarding, but also more broadly around safety and security, around fraud control. You would have to look in that context how you can actually deliver activities safely. I'll stop there and hand over to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dianah and Rachel, for those, and also for all the questions in the chat that we are, or in the Q&A that we're trying to answer. On the registration, I also want to pass on to one of my colleagues. We need to make sure that our partners have the right to work in the context where we are, and they're able to work in that context. And there might be different ways of making sure that the paperwork is right on that. And I'm sure we have different experiences we can lean on. Before that, I want to hand over to Yoshiyuki, who I think is the closest one to answer this. Yoshiyuki, can you come in, please?
Sorry, Michael, can you just repeat the question that I need to respond to?
We are discussing on the legal registration and to what extent that is required in the country where the actions are ongoing, or if it could also be alternative registered, potentially that they have another way of obtaining a legal right to work in that context. So it's basically, I think the question read, does the recipient organization need to be legally registered in the country where they're working? Over to you. I hope that was clear. Otherwise, Francesca,
yes,
can you read?
Yeah. No, sorry. Yes, I think it's clear. Yes, I think just the eligibility to receive funds from us through UNICEF, then the entity that actually concludes an agreement with us or through UNICEF has to be a legal entity. Therefore, to assess when we assess the eligibility to receive the funds, then definitely the legality of your entity comes up as an issue. So I think this really has to do when you're selected, then when we go through the due diligence, then we actually have to check that with UNICEF. So unfortunately, I think there has to have some sort of a legality to the entity to which we actually provide funds. I hope that answers the question.
If I may just add a few pointers on that, is that we also need to look at it from a risk management perspective, in that we have...
Yes, we can't see you, you're blurred. I don't know if it's just me, but go ahead.
Yes, you blurred, Rogers.
I don't know what happened to my
Your
camera.
filter.
Oh no. Oh no. Okay, I'll just switch it off. You saw me earlier. Yeah. I wanted to say it raises questions around the risk management in that you could be an entity registered, I don't know, in the US and operating in a highly sensitive or volatile context. But look at it from the point of managing finances in that you are implementing a program in country X. You don't have a physical presence there. You don't have a registration within that country or that context. You and in terms of the entity that we are contracting, it's in another country. So I don't know about the legality of it, but it raises questions and concerns, especially for our hostels, UNICEF, asking why is a program in Zimbabwe and why am I sending money to Paris? And if that organization in Paris does not have a sister organization or an affiliate in that country that is Zimbabwe. So it just raises more questions, and it could lead to delayed processes of trying to satisfy our hosts in terms from the point of risk management. So that I think that's why it is mostly required that you have some sort of presence in the country of operation.
So just add one thing to what you said. So there's a case where, for example, because of the context of the country, i.e. conflicts, then the grantee organization cannot really maintain its bank account in that country, so has to have it outside of the country. And that kind of is possible, but raises a concern on the part of us and then also the host, the UNICEF. So as Roger said, it actually takes time to justify that this organization, even though it's implementing a project in this country X, but having a bank account in country Y, we need to really kind of ask for a specific justification for that. Over to you, Dianah.
I think a question is complicated when it takes the entire secretariat to answer it. So thank you so much for challenging us with that question. There's something that someone said in the chat, a question asking, I think from Ukraine, whether when you are already receiving funds from UNICEF, you meet the criteria. Absolutely. Most organizations, 99% of the time, if you already receive funds from a UN agency, you are 99% likely that you meet the eligibility criteria for ECW. So that is, okay, Rogers has his hand. Sorry, Yoshi, did I misspeak?
No, Diane, you're absolutely right. But I think normally the organizations who are applying for the ECW funds and become grantees, they tend to overlook the eligibility, validity of the assessment. So even if you are assessed by UNICEF or UNDP or FBA, you have to look at the validity. And if the validity is as my colleagues mentioned, usually 5 years for PSEA and microassessment, if the validity is expiring, then we have to do it again. So and that takes time. So that actually really you need to be careful about the validity of your assessment when you apply for funds from us. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think we are past time. We don't want to keep colleagues that have been, have taken time out of their busy schedule to be with us today. You've heard a lot from us about how you need, what you need to receive funds from ECW. It is complicated. It's, legal things. It's legitimacy issues. It's safeguarding issues. It's all the things that we all need to do as process things to actually get to the amazing work that you do. I just want to say that this is not a measure of your expertise to deliver quality programs. We know that you can deliver quality programs. Localization is not just an aspiration for ECW. We know that it's the only way to deliver quality, sustainable education programs in emergencies. You are frontline actors, and your proximity to crises and context is an asset that we fully, want to empower and lean in on. We recognize that we still have a long way to go, and we are working on that, and we want to do that with you. This is a series of webinars on localization that will be undertaking with our colleagues at INEE. We want to shape, you to work with us to shape our next strategic plan commitments on localization. So we are hoping that you will continue to engage with us. We do recognize that we need to simplify these processes and reduce bottlenecks and ensure that our funding mechanisms are truly meet your needs, as some of you have put in the chats and in the Q&A, and not the other way around. So your detailed input and flexibility and to engage with us is really vital to this process. And ECW is committed to strengthening our partnerships with you and ensuring greater share of our resources flows directly to national organizations as much as possible. Thank you so much for being with us today and speaking to us. Over to Sonia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dianah, and thank you so much to ECW colleagues for being here and really trying to make this information as accessible and navigable as possible. We still have 330 attendants. So thank you to those of you who are still here 5 minutes past for sticking with us. We hope this has been a useful space. We will share this information as noted in the chat on the INEE website. So it won't be available today, but very soon you will be able to access the PowerPoint, the materials that were referenced, a recording of this webinar, and we'll do our best also. I know there were many questions that were asked and not all of them did we have the time to answer. So we'll try to consolidate answers on those questions and also link that document on the webpage as well. But just a huge thanks to ECW colleagues, to all of you for being here, and I'll hand over to Faiza for final words.
Thank you, Sonia. I just echo what you've said, and I echo what Dianah has said. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. As Dianah said, this is part of a wider series that we hope to do together with ECW colleagues on localization. And so, yeah, we look forward to continue doing this work together. Thank you, everyone.